The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got Bram coming up at 11 o'clock, and starting on Monday, our lineup changes. The Mike Greenberg Show, which we've carried here for the last 5 years, will be replaced at noon by the Clinton Yates Show. And Clinton's a local guy, grew up in D.C., worked for the Post, worked for WTOP, and then has gone out to Los Angeles and achieved even greater success with ESPN. You see him on Around the Horn all the time. And although you're in L.A., I'm kind of with Neil Diamond. L.A.'s fine most of the time. The sun shines, but it ain't home. How is it for you out there?
It's going well, Andy. It is a pleasure to talk to you. I will tell this story once because I have to, which is for the listeners who don't know. I first met Andy 24 years ago when I had the stones to roll up to the studio back when you and Tony were doing the show down at ESPN Zone.
Yep.
I handed Tony a stack of newspapers, and I said, I want to be a sports writer. They were all my clips. And you guys put me on the air. You were doing a bit called the Fantasy Head League where you were drafting different talking heads at ESPN. And I was the draft expert because I watched so much television. I told him, pick Carl Ravitch. This guy's on all the time. Trust me. And he picked him with the number one pick and blew out the league. But from there, things went on. And now I'm in Los Angeles, and it's been great. But the thing about it is, it's funny to watch things back home now.
Yeah.
Oldie's done in 4 records. The Commanders are actually respectable. I just saw the Wizards made a trade, but it's always interesting to look from afar on what it is that made you who you are. And then once again, to quote Tony one more time and one last time, the teams of my youth will always be based in D.C.
Yeah, well, look, you use the word stones. In my house, they call it chutzpah. And you are probably the last journalist of your generation to say you want to be a sports writer because that's going the way of the dodo bird. You still do write, though, right? You're still writing for ESPN,
I do. I still write. The site, when it first started, was called The Undefeated. It's now called Anscape. But I still write a lot about culture and sports and everything that interweaves between those two things. Writing, to me, young journalists, and I use journalists as loosely as you do, is so important. It structures how you think. It structures how you can present your ideas. So even if you're somebody that talks on a camera or into a microphone, at the core of it is writing in terms of the way you're able to present who you are. And for me, it's always been I don't want to say my favorite mode of expression, but it's always meant the most, particularly when you're dealing with certain subjects. When you get to write about people and their lives and their missions and their causes, it has a little different effect than just talking does when they can see their name or the name of their town or their team in print, so to speak, or on the internet. It's just a different effect, Andy, and that's still something that means a lot to me.
Well, 100%. The 3 of the most successful people doing TV and radio are former columnists. Will Bonantoni, of course, and Dan Le Batard. They've all done well. And this is what I've always felt, is when you're a columnist, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And although it's longer in print than a thought on the air, to frame your arguments that way is incredible training to have opinions on the air. Don't you feel that way?
Absolutely. That was part of the reason why I was interested in media to begin with, is that I was convinced when I read the newspaper as a child. I was like, oh, these are smart people. Their lives seem like they're fun, and they have a incredible grasp and command of the language in a way that was admirable. So when I finally got to what is it I want to do with my life, that was something that I thought would, make me a little bit more respectable in the world. And it turned out to be something that has been very fruitful for me personally. But this is something I plan to bring to the show, Andy. It's called Clinton and Friends, and my friends are people I've met along the way doing that exact job, formulating opinions on things, trying to present stories and arguments in a way that is convincing, illuminative, and just otherwise interesting. And that's hopefully what the vibe I can bring to the airwaves is, something I've been doing a little bit here and there, over the years. And I say a little bit, I'm joking, but that's the vibe. I am still at my core a newspaper columnist. That's what I do, and that's what I plan to bring to the airwaves.
Well, we once had a show here on Channel 9, is even before my time, called Sam and Friends, and they eventually became the Muppets. So maybe Clinton and Friends will have the same kind of success.
If I could get the Muppets on my set, that would be a life win, Andy. Forget about everything.
I think they're still around, and you're in L.A., Hollywood. Why not? Why wouldn't it happen? We're talking
not a bad idea.
We're talking to Clinton Yates, who will start. And I called it the Clinton Yates Show, but it's Clinton and Friends. It'll start Monday here on ESPN 630 at noon. And before we get into more of that, let's talk some hometown stuff. You watched My God, you're in your early 40s, so you're a little older than my son. But even for you, I mean, you don't have any recollection of the 91 season, do you?
Oh, I do. Andy,
You
the
do.
first season I ever went to a full year of football games was that year.
Oh, you
I
did?
was 9 years old.
Okay.
My dad got off the list. I went to every home game and the 2 playoff games. I was at the seat cushion game. I was at the championship game. This was my indoctrination into sports. Before that, we had gone to Hoyas games. That was my first sort of big-time live sporting event. I went with my dad. But by the time we got off the list and went down to RFK all the time, that was the year. So I was a big-time diehard for a long time, and I'll sort of lay this out. This was what I cared about as far as football was concerned. But then the ownership changed, and then things got to where they got, and then my favorite football player of all time, got drafted, Sean Taylor, and then he passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then as things started happening, honestly, Andy, my love for football sort of died with Sean Taylor in a certain way.
Wow.
These days, I enjoy the camaraderie of the NFL. I very much like Sundays as a cultural thing, but I'm not face painting anymore. I'm not putting T-shirts on my head like I once did. But that all being said, seeing the rise of the Commanders this season has been one of the greatest community experiences I can remember in a long time. Just because all of the incoming I'm getting of people just genuinely being happy about what's going on Sundays is an unbelievable feeling. And to take it a little bit more personally, part of the reason why I truly had to step away was when people who I knew and I worked with started showing up in those congressional reports that were victims of abuse and all sorts of problems, like literal people I knew who I had their numbers in my phone and talked to. I had to make a big distance between myself and the franchise just personally. This experience with Josh Harris, with frankly, to quote, to sort of touch on the LA side, with Magic Johnson adding some level of, just general respect to what the franchise brings, never mind Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn resurrecting his career as a coach. It's been really good to watch. It's a good national story, never mind our personal connections, obviously to the nation's capital. And I love it for them. It's not a problem for me to see that team do well remotely just because I walked away for my own reasons.
Okay, so even though your first love with the team was Redskins, and we all agree it can't be Redskins again, it was very lukewarm at best, and some they did polls like only 17% of the fans liked the names. What were your thoughts when the other day Josh Harris said they're keeping Commanders?
Honestly, Andy, my thoughts were it's about damn time you put this argument to rest. I don't use that word. I understand why people do, but I don't understand the obsession over the name. It is very weird to me, to be quite honest, that after 30-odd years of this team being absolutely deplorable in more ways than just on the football field, and you finally get a product, people are worried about this as a branding standpoint, considering the controversy as to why they changed it to begin with. I will never forget when NASCAR banned the Confederate flag officially from their ranks in terms of what was allowed to be presented at races.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted and I said this is the single biggest thing that I can imagine that will lead to Washington's football team changing their name. Bam, it did. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if this is the side of history people want to be on, arguing about using that word, so be it. But you're not coming to dinner at my house because it's just not worth it. Are we watching the football, or are we concerned about stupid headdresses and things that we used to do? To me, this is a matter of growth that is not that difficult to let go of. Not at all.
Yeah, no,
and that's kind of the whole thing for me,
I agree. And I said this yesterday, that the basketball team has been the Wizards as long as they were the Washington Bullets. It's almost right down the middle. And Abe Pollin, after the death of his friend Yitzhak Rabin in a murder, decided he was going to change the name, and there's pushback for a while. People got over it. Maybe people don't care now because the Wizards stink, but it's a different thing. So people move on, and I think eventually, and like my grandchildren will never know anything but Commanders, so it's not a big deal. The quarterback story, and in the last 25 years, the biggest athletic star here has been Alex Ovechkin in a sport which does not rise to the level of the NFL. To have a star like Jaden Daniels, I know what it means here. What is your view from it 3,000 miles away?
I think the big part about it to me is that it shows something that I talk about all the time, which is quarterback is the worst coach position in the NFL. And this is a whole other discussion that is only of import here because the Commanders have gotten it right. in the context of you picked somebody, you've developed somebody, you stayed with somebody, and there does not appear to be a problem at the position. I love Bob Griffin. He's a friend of mine. But the way that he came along between trading everybody for him and the way that the owner and the coach were fighting over him, it felt like he was never really properly embraced as to what he should be from a development standpoint. None of these issues are the case with Jaden. He's there, Heisman guy, picked him, played him, bam, success. That doesn't happen in the NFL, kiddos. Look around the league. It's not that easy to do. And for that position to be the central position as to why this team is getting better, you cannot ask for a better sort of root to stem situation as far as how you build a team. I'm so happy for a guy like Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, who's finally got somebody that can get him the ball, and an offense, a guy like Zach Ertz actually resurrecting his career who wants to come back because of a rookie. That's crazy to think. These things don't just happen. The football team has won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. All of those guys were kind of also ran, guys that had sort of found the end of their careers and found a little magic. That formula worked in that era of the NFL. It's different now. And for this football team to be able to put it together and do it, I don't want to say the right way because that sounds judgmental, but the effective way, that's almost the best part about it. It's not just some random flash-in-the-pan situation. They got a guy you can build on. And foundationally, Andy, you know how important that is.
Oh, yeah, and in this city where you had Doug Williams, who was fantastic in a flash, but, frankly, at the end of his career, you're looking at the next 10 years of possibly the best player in the league, an African-American at a position which he wouldn't have been allowed to play 30 years ago. I mean, this is really a remarkable change for sports.
It's a huge deal, Andy, him being a brother and the relationship he has with his mom, that whole family aspect being a big part of what the storyline is. And this is something that I say a lot that people kind of forget about regarding this franchise and its relationship with the fan base, which is something that as a kid I connected to a lot. Washington was never Oakland with the outlaw vibe. It was never Dallas with the flashy vibe. The entire point of what the fan base was for the Burgundy and Gold was good dudes who were good football players.
Yep.
That's it. And this is part of what that tradition is. So forget about the name. I want people to remember that that was the whole point of why people liked this team, is that there was a certain amount of relatability to everybody involved that really connected with the fan base in and around D.C. in a bipartisan kind of way. Jaden Daniels and that whole situation is exactly that. That's the part that I love the most, being able to see, is that folks just feel good about the dudes on the field, never mind the winning. It's a great thing.
Talking to Clinton Yates, who starts Clinton and Friends here at noon on Monday on ESPN 630. I talked about this story before you came on. Mike Freeman's got a column today about Trump attending the Super Bowl. And I want to get your thoughts on that. But also, as someone at ESPN, there's, a big debate over, stick to sports, how far can you go politically? This, to me, is not a political issue. There's more to it than that. But what kind of latitude do you have, and not just what you're going to do on the radio, but your work at ESPN on that?
Well, for those that don't know, a lot of what I write about is, frankly, the intersection of black culture with sports. So there is a certain inherent politicism simply in existing as an opinion writer in that space that I bring to pretty much everything. And that's not to say that I'm out here arguing with folks about who should be doing what on whatever side of the aisle, but there are certain things that are just impossible to ignore from the lens of what race is in America. I think back to the bubble, for example, when the Milwaukee Bucks and various teams said, we're not playing. There are too many things happening across the country. And, you have to write about that in the realest sense. This whole discussion changed, Andy, when athletes themselves started talking about these things in real spaces. That became a part of the story, because if you're reporting on the reality in front of you and the actual humans playing the games are talking about it as well, then you're not making an issue of it. You're simply discussing what is being discussed in these rooms. And that's just the reality of the situation. Now, of course, that changes as far as how certain things go. Political matters are always something that I think are going to touch people in different ways. But I do think we're at a point in America where people understand that you cannot just separate the two like Neapolitan ice cream. The three, you know what I mean? That's not a real thing at this point. And, Trump is coming to the Super Bowl. I found it interesting because I don't know that I necessarily realized this. It's the first time ever that a sitting president has gone to the Super Bowl. And I was talking to Tisha Thompson, who we know from, her work in D.C., who works with us at ESPN as an investigative reporter these days. The security situation there is going to be a massive one. And this is sort of an aside. I realize that, but it's just something to think about. It's going to be very interesting. New Orleans had that circumstance with the Sugar Bowl and the Terrorism Act. And in general, for those that don't know, Kathy Lanier, former Metropolitan Police Department police chief, is now the head of security for the NFL. There is a DC tie there. So there's just a lot going on that has a lot of interesting ties. And I am very curious to see what the reception is for him, to be quite honest. I was at that World Series game where POTUS showed up, this particular president, and it was awkward to say the least. You know? As far as Q rating goes, I don't know if this is the best move for him, but I'm also not somebody in this administration who makes decisions like that.
No, but the security point is a very important one. I've talked about this. The first Super Bowl post 9/11 was in New Orleans, and I woke up that morning to go to the game. They said get there early. There was a ring of tanks around the Superdome, and the security has obviously changed, in those 20+ years. So I'm just, what you mentioned about the ramp up after what happened at the Sugar Bowl and then him coming. Man, if you want to be in your seat, you better get there by noon because you're going to be standing in security lines forever. That's going to be another thing. That's
absolutely. I mean, listen, I was talking to Tisha for an episode of ESPN Daily, the podcast that I do as well, and she said she's been there the whole week. She said she's seen more uniformed officers with firearms in New Orleans than she's ever seen anywhere in her life. Like, inauguration level security was the word that she used for what that particular part of America is doing right now, that town in New Orleans. And that, to me, is mind-boggling, especially when you think about New Orleans. Laissez les bons temps rouler. People having fun, boozing in the streets. No. You better watch yourself, player, because they're watching.
And your thoughts on them removing end racism from the end zone to have other sayings there, clearly in response to Trump being there?
Yeah, I would say so. And, just in general, what the NFL's role is in messaging regarding social issues, I think is one that is going to be an ever-changing thing in our lives. I had sort of forgotten those were even there, if I'm being quite honest, Andy. You know what I mean? Because they had become sort of part of the furniture in the way that fields look. So, that to me is what it is. I mean, I think, how do I say this? Removing it is a bigger statement, I felt, than adding it.
Sure.
Because I just, you know what I mean? I just don't know how many people are going to really negatively react to that, because it's not like it changes it. It didn't change a whole lot either way. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where I am on that. If somebody, I don't know, you remember the old movie Shawshank Redemption where he walks out of the thing and what he does is he puts on those fancy shoes because nobody's going to notice? This is akin to that for me, is that you change your shoes. Like, okay, sweet. Thanks, guys.
Exactly. All right, the first Clinton and Friends show, great trivia. First guest on the Tony Kornheiser show on ESPN was Lee Corso. First group of friends that will join you on Monday.
It is going to be probably between Mina Kimes and Kevin Clark. It is the day after the Super Bowl, so we're going relatively football heavy. And I used to do the morning roast with Mina Kimes and Dominic Foxworth. And I was just at Mina's live show here. She recorded a live pod here in Los Angeles. So probably going to be Mina. That would make sense, but we'll see how timing works out. And I'm just really looking forward to it. And I want to say this quickly before we go, Andy. Young people out there, follow and chase your dreams. You just might get it. You're listening to someone who did it, and it worked.
Absolutely. You got chutzpah. You call it stones. I call it chutzpah. And good for you. And looking forward to the show. Thanks, Clinton. Best of luck with that.
Appreciate it, Andy. Have a great week.
You too. That's Clinton Yates. And Clinton and Friends will make its debut at noon on Monday on ESPN 6:30. Stay with us. We're coming right back.